All right, so can you all hear me all right? Yes. Good. So we're really glad to be here with you tonight, and we want to have a conversation about nature, its many meanings, and how the different kinds of work that we do, Rebecca, Annabel, and myself, and how they intersect with what nature might mean for us as a society. And I thought I would start out by just talking a little bit with you about how this word nature has functioned historically, because some commentators have observed that the word nature may be the most complicated word in the English language, because it's a word that's been used to so many different purposes. So, for instance, if you go back to ancient Greek culture, the word nature referred to what we might describe as the inner essence of things, enabling them to be the things that they are. So it's in the essence of a tree to grow into the particular form that that tree is, whether it's an oak or a birch or whatever, or that it's in the nature of a human being to develop certain kinds of capacities. And so it was clearly grounded in the world, but it wasn't about, pretty vistas or things of that sort. It was a very different kind of conception. And then when we move into more modern periods, we discover that the word nature takes on a very different sensibility, because it is understood to be very much a mechanism. It's basically a play field or a production platform where human beings can access nature and use it in all sorts of ways to engineer and construct the kinds of things we need. We then move a little bit further. There's some concern about how human beings are using this phenomenon called nature. And we get to a romantic period where people are trying to recover something about nature's power, which is not reducible to a mechanism. It's something sublime. It's something powerful. It's a kind of refuge. It has therapeutic value. And there's all kinds of writers, and you know who some of these people are, people like Wordsworth, or in this country Thoreau and others, who are writing about nature in a fundamentally new way. And I think that's just important to register, because I think for a lot of people historically, the idea that you would want to go to the top of a mountain would have been not just foolish, but frightening, because nature was not a place of solace or comfort. It was a place of terror. And so people didn't think about nature in this way. And then I think what's become really fascinating is more recently within eco-criticism or environmental philosophy, a number of writers are talking about the end of nature, that the word nature has really run its course and no longer applies. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is because nature has such normative connotations that people find highly objectionable. For instance, when someone says to you what you're doing is unnatural, that usually means it's not a good thing to do. And so there's a normative dimension now to this term that people are quite averse to. And then the other big one, I think, is that we have entered a new era that has been labeled by geomorphologists and earth system scientists called the Anthropocene. And I don't know if that's a word that means much to you, but it's a technical term that refers to the fact that human beings have now become so powerful through their economies that there is no longer a square inch anywhere on this planet where the human influence can't be observed and witnessed in some way or other. And so, ranging from the cellular level all the way to meteorological levels, the human impact can be seen. And so the question is, do we still have nature? Do we still have natural phenomena when human beings seem to be so powerful now that whenever something happens, we're left to wonder, is that natural or is that anthropogenic? Is it caused by human beings? So that's a really quick tour about how this word nature has sort of surfaced historically, but also how it's being challenged more recently. So one of the good things for our conversation is that means that the whole word nature is up for grabs. And what are we going to make of this word? How are we going to deploy this word in the work that we do or in the ways we think about our place in the world? So we're going to now open it up to some conversation with Annabel and Rebecca. And maybe, Rebecca, if you'd start by talking about how does the word nature register in the worlds in which you move?
Oh, that's an easy one to start with. Thank you. So I ask my students often to tell me about formative experiences, what led them to pursue a class or a major in environmental science. And almost all of them have the story of their parents taking them on this camping trip, or the fort in the backyard, or the fishing, or whatever it is. And for me, I have a very different story. So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. Lake Erie was a block away from my house. This was in the late 70s and 80s. My dad was an environmental scientist, and I never was allowed to go into the lake. The only time I was able to go down to the beach was after big summer thunderstorms. And my dad would take my sister and I down to the beach to count tampon applicators. Seriously. Because by counting the number of applicators, you could get some sense of how large the most recent sewage spill was. And that was a major concern.
So you still went into environment?
I know. That's what's so crazy. So I grew up in this world where nature was screwed up, and we were the people who screwed it up. The most significant natural feature in my backyard was completely off limits to me, was poisoned. And that is that's not a great relationship with nature to start out with. And it took me many years, decades, to find restoration ecology. So I'm a restoration ecologist now, and that field is built on trying to undo the damage that humans, mostly humans, sometimes natural, humans have caused to ecosystems, to try to heal these ecosystems. And for me, it was like an aha moment, like, oh, okay, our relationship with nature doesn't have to be negative. We don't always have to do the wrong thing, screw it up further, that we could have this more healing, positive relationship with nature. And I feel like for me personally, my relationship with nature kind of, I honestly go back and forth. I do a lot of work in Hawaii. I got my degree in forestry. Like, I should know plants, right? I refuse to learn the plants of Hawaii. You know why? Because most of them don't belong there. Probably 90% of them are not only non-native, but probably invasive. And for me, I know that, but I just want to enjoy Hawaii.
Even though it's unnatural.
Even though it's not native.
Yeah. Oh, all right.
But it's still natural. So, seeing the world as sort of a wounded place, I don't think is a productive relationship to have. So I tend to kind of go back.
Did you have some encounter with pristine wilderness or something that made you see that there could be this other way of encountering the world?
No, no. I did not. I was diving on I used to train volunteers to monitor coral reefs in the Florida Keys. Again, not a pristine environment. And I was diving on a reef, and it looked really weird. It was mostly flat with some boulders, and there were these big wheels on and I was like, what is this? So, we pop up, and I was like, what is going on down there? Oh, that's a restoration site. We're restoring this coral reef. There was a big grounding of a ship full of, it was called the Wellwood or something, full of wheels many years ago. And so they were trying, I was like, oh, this is what I want to do, because clearly people do not know what they're doing yet. So.
Excellent. Annabel, how about you?
Well, I work in the therapeutic gardens, and I'm in the Bloomquist Garden of Native Plants, and I have to say, I work in paradise every day, and it's a man-made paradise. It's not real, really. It's a garden, and if therapeutic gardens was sort of natural, I guess it would be, natural. It would be as closer to, say, Duke Forest in a way, but even that's not natural because it's man-influenced. And as you can hear from my accent, I'm from Britain, and I'm from the north of England. And in fact, I'm from Durham in the north of England. So I have moved from one Durham to another Durham without really realizing it until I arrived here, or there. And but a couple of weeks ago, I was in the north of England, which is where I'm from, and I'm from farming background, and I'm from hill farming. And I guess my connection with nature emotionally takes me back there. takes me back to the north of England. And if you talked about Wordsworth, I mean, I'm on the east side, and he was on the west side of England, you know, northern England, in the Lake District. But we went over there, and it's like 40 miles away, so it's quite a distance, you know. But it took us an hour to get there. But it was stunning, it was beautiful, and I said to my son, this is where we're going to retire, and it's so gorgeous, and I bet it was gorgeous in Wordsworth's day. And even he complained that there were too many tourists, because it's a very touristic area, impacting that area, which is very small. And if you didn't know it, North Carolina is the same size as England, okay? So this is when I'm going to really come on to about people. In England, we have about 50 million, maybe more, thereabouts, living in an area same size as North Carolina. And most of them live around London, but there's a few, you know, bigger urban spaces. And 83% of the population of England is in lives in urban environment. 17% live in the countryside. But somehow we can still find countryside, and I see that very positive. People do go out, and I won't go down the track of British paths, some things that have gone back from, you know, hundreds of years, where we can actually walk from Land's End to John O'Groats across people's countryside. And when we first came to America, I really struggled with the fact you can't do that here. And that actually allows people to get out into the countryside, because you can actually walk into the countryside without being chased off with a gun or something. But the point I'm making really is that, you know, in 1970, I think here there was the Earth Day, the 20th of April, something like that, where in 1970 there was something like 3.8 billion people on the planet. And people were saying, we really have to reduce this down. The Green Movement in Britain was saying in the 70s, we've got to get it down to like 100 million. Now we're 8 billion nearly. And what are we going to do with all these people? We can't get rid of them, we can't lose them. We have to work with this quantity of people. And they say by 2050, I think 2/3 of the population of the world will be in urban spaces, and they'll be living in cities away from nature, the natural world. So how do we communicate with all of those people? If we're trying to protect the world, we're trying to protect nature, how do we actually encourage all those people to actually be connected to that? And going back to Durham now, Durham, North Carolina, this is, you know, we've been seeing a change there. I don't know how many people get back, but, you know, within the last 4 or 5 years, numerous thousands, I don't know how many exactly, but it's certainly into the thousands of new apartments have been built. And lots of young people are moving into them, millennials, students, and I guess young professionals. And, you know, and that's basically what they can afford. And it's the same in Europe. People can only afford really to live in apartments. They can't afford to buy houses with gardens anymore or anything like that. But what we're finding in the gardens are we do a plant sale twice a year, and in the last few years we've been having young people coming in wanting to buy houseplants. I mean it's, you know, it's synthetic again, it's not the real world, it's not a pristine environment, but people are wanting to connect by taking these houseplants, these green organisms, into their house and nurture them. There is something instinctive in us all that wants to nurture. So I have hope for us all. I really do have hope. But anyway, that's all the point I want to say about we have to learn to live with people, all of us, you know, with nature.
Yeah, so I'd like to follow up on that, because I've been long puzzled about why when we hear the word nature, we think Sierra Club calendar.
Yeah.
Right, so I grew up in Alberta, you know, directly north of here, very similar landscape to here, and we were farming. And that was the place I loved. And the experience of most of humanity throughout the world, throughout history, has not been in pristine context. They've been agricultural people for much of the time. And so, and now this leads, of course, to the question about urbanization, right? Should we be thinking about nature not as pristine wilderness, but perhaps as any agricultural landscape, any worked landscape, and then certainly also urban landscapes, right? Because if this is where people are, should we be telling people that if you're in a city, you don't encounter nature?
They have to encounter nature. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think, you know, if you think about we were just discussing it earlier about urban planning. Back in the Victorian period, the arts and crafts movement, William Morris, I don't know how many people know of him, but there was something put forward that people should have their own little piece of earth, a little piece of heaven or earth or something attached to their houses. And following the slums of the Victorian period, the Edwardian period, if you move out, say for somewhere like London, you start seeing the houses having their own little pocket handkerchief size gardens at the back, but they had something. They had something to grow their vegetables, or they had something to connect with nature. It's like our students in Durham buying their pot plants and taking them into their apartment. They had something to connect with nature, and I think, and then again post-war, people were planning. I think urban planning is so important. I know I work in a garden, but I think it's so critical that we have to get this into the policies of people. You know, post-war, they around London, they made sense. I think it was the Labour Party, but they made sense about having a green belt. And thank God they did, because otherwise you would have had urban sprawl going on for miles, and I mean, you know, tens of miles, maybe 100 miles, who knows? But it stopped it, at least. And then started producing these satellite towns called new towns, where they became some sort of utopia, you know, where people would have footpaths, and they were built in the 50s and 60s, and you know, they had footpaths and they had parks, and they had greenery. So people actually were taken out of the East End of London and they went to these new homes. And anybody watches Call the Midwife, I don't know if they do, but that is true. You know, that's what a lot of the people from that part of London did, were taken out and put into those new towns. But I think we have to think about that in urban planning today. Bring nature in. I mean, even walking down the street today in Denver, every time I saw a plant, it just sort of filled me with happiness, you know, just walking down there. So I think people feel happy, and there's lots of evidence and science to prove how it lifts the spirits, how it lifts, you know, it improves your health, you know, your blood pressure and everything, to have nature present. You know, you don't have to go to Yosemite to have that, you know. Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit, Rebecca, about how students in particular are thinking about their relationship to nature? Do they think in terms of what Annabel was just talking about, that there's kind of almost sympathetic, loving attunement to the world in which they either know or long to know? Or how do you and students think about the relationship to nature?
Well, I try to shake them up as much as possible. So I think it's really important to actually ask these questions throughout my time with them. You know, what's your relationship? What do you think of nature? You know, what's your relationship to the natural world? And typically students will have you know, it's not just the camping in the backyard, but it's also thinking of nature as these magnificent landscapes. This whole idea of sort of wilderness out there. For people who have grown up in cities and people who've grown up in rural areas, it's still, you know, that's still sort of one of the top contenders for nature. But then, you know, I hit them with, well, let's think about wilderness preservation and the history of wilderness preservation in this country, and who it was for, and who it benefited, and who it removed from the land, right? And who still has access to those spaces. And so then they're like, oh yeah, well, you know, we also have like a garden in my town, you know? And then, you know, we start to talk about sort of the different ways that all people can sort of access nature, and that this way of thinking of nature as separate, is actually pretty harmful and can reinforce some inequities in our system, in our systems, and so I think, you know, it is true though that there are plenty of students who are really engaged on campus, in the campus farm, in the Duke Forest, in the Duke Gardens, and who are trying to get other students out there, like, you guys, come out here, you know, like, get away from your screens and whatever else, and get out.
And what are they looking for when they get out? Say they go to the garden and they volunteer for a while, or they go to the Duke campus farm to do some work. What draws them out there? Is it some kind of contact that they're going to experience that they don't get other places, or what is it? Are they saying that they're going to look for nature?
No. Usually they're going to look for extra credit because I give it to them if they go outside.
All right.
I was going to say, we have work studies, quite a lot of work studies at the garden, and they're mixed, I have to say. And this may surprise people, but our best work studies are from the theology department, and this is absolutely true. And usually masters, but you know, so they're slightly older, but they just do connect. I mean, seriously, connect with the landscape and connect with the physical activity of doing the work. They really love digging holes in the ground. They really, I mean, we do give them some horrid jobs to do. And
not as a preparation for burial, though. Okay, we'll move to the next question right about now.
But no, they love it, and they do connect. And I think, and I mean, it's true, they do connect you. And I mean, I think they should be interviewed and talk about this. And I think we have put a few things into some of the Duke magazines about the students.
Yeah.
Certainly in the Duke Gardens magazine we do. But there's tremendous connection with being out there and physically working. I just think they actually do say we get sick of sitting all day listening to lectures. And I think, they want to just physically get out and do something. So I think that counterbalances them going inside and not just exercise in the gym either.
Right. So when I teach my courses, I often have students read this beautiful book by Robin Kimmerer called Braiding Sweetgrass. She's a Native American woman. She's trained as a botanist. But as she was going through her training in botany, she discovered that what she was learning in this academic scientific context was so different than what she had been taught by her elders. And so she wrote this book to try to bring into conversation with each other indigenous ways of thinking about plants and land, in which plants are our first teachers because they've been here so much longer than human beings have. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book, and I highly recommend it. But in that book, she says at one point that she thinks that so much of modern contemporary Western culture is beset by a kind of mental illness because we're living on land that we do not feel to love us. And she writes this very beautifully, but she says that gardening and farming, and I think hunting and gathering would do this too, the labor that people bring to the work of trying to grow some food, draw their sustenance from a land, meaning they join their love to a landscape, that then reciprocates with the sense that the land is loving you back in the forms of nurture and provision. Now, I know you have some thoughts about this. Do you think that this is part of what students are looking for when they go into a garden? Or maybe they're not looking for it, but maybe they're surprised by it?
I think there's some pleasure. Anybody who gardens will have pleasure at putting the astonishment sometimes, actually. I collected a lot of wild seed from around Durham, so I did this prairie a few years ago, and I collected local ecotypes, they're called, of native plants, and because that landscape is quickly vanishing, it's disappearing, and I collected these seed, and actually I have to say I hadn't got a clue what they were. I'm British, and I went out, but believe me, you soon learn, and this is something I want to emphasize to everyone. If you want to learn, you learn, and I'm sure you know that. If you're interested, you will soon learn. So now I have they're my friends. So as you walk down, or I drive along, and I go, my goodness, I've seen you, and I have to pull over, and I have to go out and look at the plant and think, okay, you're a new one, and I'm obviously I'm better now at this, and I know what the plants are now. But initially, I started off not knowing them, and I did get to know them. But going out and collecting these seeds and then growing them, you're thinking, hang on, these are all wild. It's one thing buying them in a packet from the shop or from the nursery and putting them out. They should grow because they're selling me and telling me it should be 90% germination or whatever. These are wild seed. I remember with my boss at the time sowing them, and almost like with a wish and a prayer. It was like, what's going to happen here? And they grew. And I remember the two of us just rocking and looking at these little seedlings coming through the ground. That was just like, I can't describe how we felt. And maybe that's the sort of thing that they see, something that is so, but it happens in nature all the time,
right.
Except all the competition. But it was just such an amazing, emotional thing.
Can you talk a bit about an experience you have with students, an exercise you do with them?
Yeah. But can I just say one thing about Hawaii?
You can, surely.
It's on my brain because I'm a little cold. No. I wanted to say that the Kimmerer piece really reminded me of what's been so fun and fascinating about working there and bringing students there, which is this idea that Native Hawaiians have. They call it malama aina. And it's the sense of great stewardship and love and collaboration with the land. And so they have taught me that when you restore an ecosystem, you don't just restore it for shorebird habitat or pollution filtration. You can also restore it to provide food and to restore your community and to restore your cultural practices, and that the land will benefit and that you and people will benefit too. And I think that's just such a positive, different way of thinking about our relationship. I think it can be love, but it's also respect. And I mean, the Hawaiian Islands used to feed 1 million people without a single food import, and now they import 98% of their food. So I'm thinking about how we manage ecosystems for multiple benefits. On the other hand, that's a very positive story. Everybody can get behind, taro and endangered shorebirds and cultural practices. It's not always easy to find those stories back home. And one of the the corollary of that kind of experience with students is asking students on Duke's campus, even the most beautiful part of Duke's campus. So I take my students to Duke Gardens for a suite of contemplative practices. Not for all, like my Environment 102 class, all 97 students I don't try to do this with, but my smaller seminar classes I do this with. And I take them there because I want them to pause and notice what's happening and reconnect with whatever is going on for them. It's a very scary thing to do in a classroom, but I do it. And what I have noticed, it's so interesting. Full disclaimer, one of the main reasons I do this is because I am terrible at my own contemplative practice. Sometimes the only meditation I do is like the 3 minutes at the beginning of my class where I ask us all to sit in silence. Like, this is like my practice, right? So I noticed something coming up for me by noticing what was coming up for my students when we did this. So we're in this beautiful garden. We're taking a quiet walk. We're noticing. We're trying to reconnect. And there is this sadness that descends. And it's the kind of sadness that doesn't involve people breaking down in tears or leaving the group, but you can just feel the energy. And it's due to not just one thing. It's due to one of the things that it's due to is the fact that we're so connected with our screens all the time, and we use them as a balm or as a distraction, that when you actually ask people to really actually put down their phone and start to breathe, whatever they've been running from is right there, right? So that's part of it. Another thing, people will tell me, like, I did not even notice that the tulips were blooming. I didn't even notice that the trees had started changing. I didn't notice that we had so many birds on Duke's campus. So it's this like, what the heck have I been doing that I haven't noticed this? And that can be really sad. And then I have to tell you, and this actually gives me hope, there are plenty of students who are really freaked out about what is happening to our planet. And so when you ask them to stop and reconnect and take a walk, they start thinking like, I wonder if this is going to be here for my children, or I wonder if this plant is native, or whatever it is. So there are multiple explanations for why an exercise that seems on the face of it like, great, we're going to reconnect with nature, this is going to be fun, would then actually result in this sadness.
Yeah. I mean, it raises the question about how we come to even think about the world more broadly, so that sadness is the response that people would have. Because if you're going to have sadness about what's happening to our natural places, that would assume that there's some vision about how we should be relating, how these natural places ought to be. And that raises the question about, how do we think in the most general but also expansive way about what the meaning of nature is or what the purpose of nature is. And I'll just relay one tradition, which is a Jewish teaching about this, where maybe you've heard about this familiar story, that beginning of Genesis, where there are multiple days. It's a poem describing how the world is made by things being distinguished and so forth. And you get this famous passage where, God makes the human beings in the image of God, and they're supposed to subdue and have dominion. But what gets left out in that rendition is the seventh day, which is a really important day, because the rabbis, when they came to look at this seventh day in this creation poem, they realized there's something very odd going on, because it says in the poem that on day 6 it's finished, but then day 7 starts with God saying it's finished again. And they asked the question, why are there 2 finishings? And the rabbis had the most beautiful explanation for this. They said, well, it's true that the world was made in the 6 days, and it was made beautifully, but what was left unmade was its purpose or point. And the point was for human beings to learn to delight in that beauty. Okay, now this is an enormous point to make, because it's saying that the whole world exists for us to come into the presence of beauty and goodness and find delight in it. And the question was, well, why? And they said, because that's what God did. God rested on the 7th day to come into the presence of the world. And of course, God's first Sabbath is one where the world it's pristine in every way. But I think what we discover is that we have so many students in ourselves, in our own experience, we don't experience delight often, because what we experience is so much damage, right? Aldo Leopold has this great line where he says, the punishment of an ecological education is to see a world of wounds where everybody else sees a beautiful vista, right? So we're not always trained to see the trouble, but we could if we were more attentive. And that, of course, causes a sense of lament and grief. And so I'm just wondering, what can either of you say about how you encourage people to not just flee away from the grief or the lament, but then move into another space?
It's a difficult one. I'm a simple gardener, and I get pleasure, and I know a lot of people get pleasure out of gardening and working in nature. And I have to say, at a very personal level, since I've been working at the gardens, I don't really feel any sense of sort of sadness. Okay, I don't. And in fact, I never thought about talking about this before, but in fact, I feel a sense of belonging and a sense of knowing why I'm here and why I exist. And being part of a process, being part of nature again, being part of life, and being part of what exists, and being part of that, especially in the Bloomquist, but not just Bloomquist, because it's a native plant, it's very natural, native plant garden, very natural, but just in the gardens as a whole, and I think we're very unique in the fact that we're surrounded day in, day out by plants, and not just by plants, because I think, I guess I sort of preach too much to people, and I preach a lot about that we have to make improvements and we have to do things, and I'm very positive that we can make changes. So like, gardens aren't just about pretty plants, and people come into gardens and just think they're pretty blooms, and that's what they look at, and they take the photographs of those pretty blooms, but you've got to look deeper. And you look at the interactions, and the fact that a garden is a habitat. You look in the interactions that they attract insects, or then the insects attract birds, and and it's more than that. And especially in the garden that I have, and my husband calls it the ugly garden in a way, which it isn't. I mean, it's a joke, by the way. But when you've got the beautiful garden of the historic garden with all the tulips and the daffodils and all those beautiful blooms, it's basically it's flowers in, it's art in flowers, really, is the historic garden. And the Asiatic garden is stunning in its design and it's in its beauty, and the Discovery garden as well is what it takes through. And our garden is very natural and very native and very sort of wild. But that has its own beauty too, which I love. And our new area, which relatively new area, which is the Piedmont Prairie that we have. And if you had come to North Carolina, 300, 400 years ago, you'd have found grassland there and not trees. And that's what we're trying to tell the people. We're trying to connect them to the land. And as they come into that landscape, which as you come into the Bloomquist now, it looks like a clear-cut area, actually. It's clear-cut. Some people think, my God, it's clear-cut and all these weeds have grown. Well, actually, it's designed to look like that. And we're trying to shock people. We're trying to shock people to come from a very more pristine part of the garden into that space and to take on and say, this is how it used to look. And a large proportion of these plants in this area are so endangered. They're federally endangered. You can't give away the seed even. You just can't do anything with it because they're so rare. And what we want to try and get people to do is look at this space, which is very natural, it's very wild, and actually see it for more than what it is, to see it as a home for the birds, as a home for the insects, to look at the beauty of the actual grasses as they sway in the wind. It's not just to look at the peonies that are bright purple, or people like those blooms so much, but as soon as you tell them the story and connect them that this is what it used to be like, people change in their heads. They change in their minds as to how they see the landscape. And for our challenge at the garden really is to try and tell people this. And that's very, very hard, actually. Yeah. It's very hard to get people to see this sort of landscape and see nature in a different sort of way.
So what you're mentioning is really important, I think, for us to acknowledge, which is to say there's nothing natural about nature.
Yeah.
Because whenever we approach the world, nature, or whatever term we use, we bring a hermeneutical or an interpretive lens to what we see. So that, for instance, to give a very famous contrast, Darwin came to see nature in Tennyson's words, right? Red in tooth and claw. It's cutthroat, it's bloody, it's nasty, it's all competition, struggle for survival. But then you read indigenous people and they say, no, we see kinship, we see community, we see cooperation, we see home. And I think it's just worth noting that whenever we use the word nature, we should always ask, what nature are you talking about? Because nature isn't one thing. We don't all see it the same way. We're prepared to see it in certain ways because we interpret based upon the kind of life experience that we have. So Rebecca, how do you think about getting students to see in some fresh ways?
Ooh. Well, I've given you some of my secrets already. Depress them, make them be quiet, take them to Hawaii.
You can take them to Hawaii?
Yeah.
Wow, I need to come to that class.
I know. It's true. In my field, one of the sort of projects of ecologists and environmental economists is to think about nature in terms of dollars. So maybe if we calculate the value of nature for all the different things it provides us, all the different products and services and functions, then we'll make better decisions. So there is this whole wave of commodification of nature. And students really like that.
Oh, I don't.
Me neither. Me neither. And even when you say, well, how are you going to put a price on aesthetic experience or spiritual connection or cultural practices, they're like, well, you can just sort of estimate that because the number's so high. And it's true. I mean, the number for, what would it cost us to do everything that nature does? I mean, people have estimated it at $3 trillion, at $30 trillion. I mean, it's a huge number. So you don't actually need to factor that other stuff in because, it's taken care of. But I find that, students like all of us want the answer, right? It is not helpful to live in a world full of wounds, right? It is not helpful to rest in despair. They want the hope. They want that counterbalance, and so they're looking for solutions like that.
Right.
And yeah, I don't love it either. I try to bring up the critiques of it. I talk about what it misses, but it's handy. It's handy.
So we have 1 minute left in which we get to leave these wonderful people with a parting thought, and then we're going to go to Q&A. So if you have questions, be getting ready to state them. So a parting thought, Annabel.
Well, I mean, this is really off the wall a bit, but I'm a big believer, as I said to you earlier, that I think it's difficult for us all just to do, like, say, I'm going to not do this at all, and stop, eating this or drinking this or whatever. But I think if we all did one small thing, we would make massive changes, like switching a light bulb off, or if we turned our thermometers, the heating down 1 degree, or turned our air conditioning up 1 degree. Or I've got a real bee in my bonnet about dryers. These dryers you use to dry your clothes? In Britain, we have clotheslines. I just didn't get it here, why people do not like hanging.
We don't air our dirty laundry in public.
I'm sure you don't. I just don't get this. I kept saying, I'm sure the Queen has clotheslines, I just don't get why people have to have these dryers. Just add up the amount of money and energy you would save if you didn't put the dryer on. I know how much we would save if we didn't put the dryer on and hang out, but you're not allowed to because the local, will come around and fine you. I just think it's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. The sun can dry your clothes. You do not need to put it into one of these machines that makes a lot of noise. You think it's going to suddenly burst into flames,
Rebecca,
That's
you're
my party.
parting of that.
I love this. Yeah, what she said. So I have brought a poem, a very short poem, I promise. It's a part of which I use as a prayer, a bedtime prayer for my children. And since it's late, or getting late, I thought I would read it. I think it's relevant. It's called On Belonging. It's by a poet named Ala Renee Bozarth. You took flesh from clay, but the clay did not come from just one place. To feel alive, important, and safe, know your own waters and hills, but no more. You have stars in your bones and oceans in blood. You have opposing terrain in each eye. You belong to the land and sky of your first cry. You belong to infinity.
That's really good to end on. All right, so let's go to Q&A. Shall we do that? We have microphones, so if you have a question, please.
Can be heard. David Henderson, 68. Would you address the issue of transportation and the protection or desecration of nature and the decision by the Duke administration to kill the light rail?
All right, who wants to take that one? So the question was about transportation, if you didn't hear it, and how transportation lines are doing a lot of damage. So who would like to?
So I'll just tell you. So this is a hot issue. Students are pretty fired up about it, so that's interesting, I think, and good. And the Nicholas School faculty was very disappointed with Duke's decision. But already, and it hasn't been that long since that whole thing fell apart. Already there's been some investigations and reporting that suggests that Duke was not the only sort of obstacle to that plan, and in fact wasn't even the most significant obstacle. So I think we need to ask our administration for more, and I think we need to ask them to continue to engage in these issues. And I can tell you from where I sit in the Nicholas School that we're pretty fired up about it too.
Other questions? Right here.
Theology has had a lot to do with defining nature, in
Right.
a sense, and particularly Christian theology and this belief that the world was created for us,
Right.
has certainly had an impact on our environmental policies. How does that change? How do we deal with that?
So the question is about how theology, especially Christian theology, has a lot to say about how we have come to view the environment. I think, first of all, I would say that there's been a very diverse set of ways that Christians have thought about the environment. And the infamous verse, subdue and have dominion over everything, that's a verse, for instance, that was meant to mean many, many different things. And it's not really until the industrial age that people began to think, partly because they now had access to technological means to exert power over landscapes that would have been unknown to people certainly who would have given us that verse. Like, these are agricultural people. There's no sense that you can dominate by exploiting, right? But this legacy of subdue and have dominion is enormous. It's been incredibly destructive. And I think what's encouraging to see is that there are a number of theologians, I'm one of them, who are working very hard to show how much of a distortion that way of speaking is. And it goes, hand in glove with some other teaching, which is to say, the world's all going to burn up anyway, so it doesn't matter. And that's an absolutely ridiculous thing to say if you read the Bible, because the Bible starts with God loving the world, and it ends with God returning to be with the world forever and reconciling and redeeming the world. So Christians have done a terrible job and have actually distorted their own tradition terribly by using this verse to say we can do with the world whatever we want, and the world exists for our own pleasure. Other questions? I know we're between you and French desserts.
She's got a question for you.
Okay, over here. I'm sorry, I can't see hands very well.
I would have just loved to hear if you guys have seen anything at Duke or other where it's sort of like breaking down the barriers to inequality and connection to nature.
So the question was about, does Duke have any activity or programming around breaking down the barriers and the inequalities with respect to access to nature? Is that about all right? Okay.
So students are really interested in this, and people in my school are really interested in this. I mean, I think that all environmental issues are environmental justice issues, human rights issues at some stage. Not specifically dealing with unequal access to nature, but much more specifically, I have been teaching about a classic textbook case of environmental injustice in North Carolina, in eastern North Carolina, related to hog farming. And I spent an intro to environmental science and policy of a lot of ground to cover, and I spent sometimes 4 weeks on it. It's such a really interesting topic to teach about all sorts of things related to it. And some students are not satisfied with just those 4 weeks. They want to do more. And so our challenge at the Nicholas School is to find opportunities to engage in this very difficult work from our place of privilege, and starting in our own communities is probably the right way to go. Diversity and inclusion in our school, like all across Duke, is a major priority, and it's our biggest challenge, certainly. But that's something that gives me hope, to have students get pretty upset about this and come to me and say, like, why are we buying pork from Smithfield and I'm no longer eating bacon? I tell them at the beginning of the hog farming thing, like, if you like bacon, eat it now, because you're not going to want to eat it in a week.
I think one of the things that is really exciting is that, a few years ago even, the face of environmentalists was mostly older, mostly affluent. They all drove Priuses. And now the face of environmentalism is young. It's mostly women and people of color. It's changed dramatically. And so what they're bringing to Duke is a different set of questions, which is really exciting, and it's having effects in different places. So I work with the World Food Policy Center. Access to food is a major environmental justice issue, and people get really fired up about it. And so it's a wonderful opportunity to get people connected with environmental issues, because people eat, And they don't often think about their eating, but the minute they do, they discover it opens them to the world in ways that they hadn't anticipated. Because to talk about food, you got to talk about energy. You got to talk about land and water. You got to talk about agricultural economies. You got to talk about distribution networks. It's everything. And so that's another place, I think, where we're seeing students come to discovery, but also come to see that there's potential to do really good work.
And I would say, if I've got the question right about inequality, I mean, I have to say, I mean, I'm not a Duke alumni. And I find it quite incredible that this family or this university has somewhere like Duke Gardens, which is completely free. It's in the middle of a city, which is, you know, not a particularly wealthy city. And the people who come to Duke, the Duke Gardens, you know, if you walk through, they're from all different sort of ethnic minorities. Mostly, really. We get a lot of people who don't have, you know, in terms of, you know, their sort of social level of you know, how much money they earn, it will be low. But they come, and sometimes in the summer holidays, the school holidays, I would say this is where some of the kids come for their holidays. They come to play, they come to see the gardens, and this is where they spend their time. And we get about 500,000 people through those doors, those gates. I mean, some it'll be staff, some it'll be students, but we get a lot of the Durham community through the gardens, into the gardens. And we have a huge opportunity there to help and influence and educate about the environment. But I think Duke University, and particularly Duke Gardens, is a huge value, absolutely massive value, particularly to the local community, massive value.
Can I just add too, I don't know how long it's been since you've been back to Duke, but there's now a Duke campus farm. And it's not insignificant. I mean, a good number of students are going out there to work. Classes go out there from time to time, and it's also a wonderful opportunity for students to engage in this kind of work. Another question out there?
I have one.
Yes.
This question's for Annabel. You concerned those of us with kids at Duke right now greatly when you said our kids are running out to buy pot plants?
I didn't quite catch what you said. I didn't catch that one that everybody laughed about. What, sorry?
I thought you were growing.
Is that why people laughed, was it? All right. The joke comes hours later with me.
This is Colorado. You have to.
All right. Yeah, we call them potted plants. Don't you call them potted plants here? No, okay, house plants.
Well, no, potted plants,
Pot
but not
plants,
pot plants. Pot plants is, yeah.
Yeah, pot plants. Yeah, we do call them pot plants. Yeah, plants you buy for pots.
We could end on the theme of pot if you would like. So we have one more question we have time for. And you need to put your hand up very high because we're seeing shadows out there.
We've got one right here.
All right.
Oh, well, all right. So, Big Island, Ina, I love, Rebecca, your call out to natives and the like, but I guess what's on my mind is that our definition of nature is what is not human. It's what is the other than us. Mm-hmm. And our relation to it comes from our labor, comes from what we do as people. I wonder if you all might say a word or two about how our labor interacts with nature and trying to recuperate from the traumas that you've all described that we're living through.
I got a really long answer, so I'm not going to speak right away.
I mean, I think, you know, some of what I've spoken about in terms of being a restoration ecologist is it really about that reweaving of a relationship and reconsidering relationships. But, you know, it's interesting, as you were talking, I was thinking about how I teach my kids about nature. And my 4.5-year-old, I have a 4.5-year-old, and she's kind of dirty. Like, she doesn't like to bathe. She loves to be a princess, but she doesn't like to bathe. So we talk a lot about, like, you know, you have, like, lots of microorganisms living on you and in you, and you need them, and they're very good for you, and you have to eat your, you know, probiotics, but you probably should bathe every just once in a while. But anyway, just thinking about how we're raising her to not think of nature as something, we're raising her to think of nature as being her. Right, like as being an ecosystem, and that's like another extreme. But it's not unreasonable, right, to stop thinking about this nature as something that we have to manage, we have to fix, we have to use labor to extract from. We are as natural as it gets, right?
I love that answer, and I want to just build on that because, I think one of the worst legacies of modern kinds of thinking is to have extricated human beings out who can stand above nature and then work on it in particular sorts of ways. And that's a disaster, because the truth of your own body communicates that you are an ecosystem, multiple ecosystems, right? There's more genetic material in you that is not you. And so I tell my students, look, you're a zoo. That's the thing you have to understand. You are a zoo. And once you understand that and recognize that there are mirrored relationships between the microbiome in your gut and the microbiome in soil, you might start to think differently about your place in the world. You don't float above the world, because the minute you think you float above the world, you're dead. And so your body is constantly bringing you back in. So nature is you. It's nature circulating through you. It's you circulating through nature. It requires a different way of thinking about our humanity.
I mean, I would completely concur with this. I mean, I was going to talk about this earlier as well, but we are just, I think at the end of the day, I think the bugs are going to survive. The bugs will outlive man. They're clever. I think the bacteria will be the most clever things we have. And, once man's gone, I think the bugs will be there still. I don't know if that's part of the answer.
A Cambridge biologist once said that God has an inordinate fondness for beetles.
Well, I was thinking of bacteria. But no, I mean, I didn't quite get the gist of your question there. But I mean, in terms of the labor, in terms of what we're doing physically, I mean, I physically do a lot of labor, if you want to look at it like that. I physically look very dirty every day. And but what we're doing is we're showing other people what to do as well. And people are coming into the garden, seeing what we're doing. And I mean, if we had another hour or so, I could actually give you, we've talked around I wouldn't say around the country, but I've talked in England about it, but we've talked in Canada about it. We talked in quite a lot of presentations about the work we're doing with this prairie work, with the use of the local ecotypes, that we're talking to people in facilities, in the hospital, about putting pollinator gardens into the parking lots, or car parks as I call them, in the medians, that will be aesthetically pleasing to people, but also aesthetically attractive to insects. So instead of things just being just grass or whatever, and the cost does come in, because when we're saying, well, has it got value? Well, it has value to the animals and the insects and to us, but it also saves money. It saves money on people having to cut it. It saves money on people having to irrigate it if we put the right plants in. So there has to. I think when people are going to do something and make decisions, you have to sort of weigh up the costs of what it takes. And if we can be saying it's a balance to both, then I think that's great. But anyway, I'm not sure this completely answers your question about it, but I think we're doing an awful lot in the gardens to actually get out there with communities. And I could go on and on and on, because we're doing quite a lot. But and I think it's successful. So.
Well, folks, we're finished here. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
for
let's
coming.
give a round of applause to our panel. Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for coming. What an honor to have you all here, and such a pleasure to have all of you enjoy our evening. And we would invite you to go and enjoy and see Monet's connection to nature. That's such a great experience. It's the only place that we have it here in Denver, and we're so honored to have you all have come, the Duke staff and everybody here. And on behalf of the Duke Alumni Association of Colorado and the Mothership, we thank you all for coming. And you have until 10 o'clock to enjoy the evening in the gallery, so please go and enjoy the evening, and we hope to see you again at more events. Thank you.